You need a range of policies.
Douglas Carswell, in those terms, what would be your priority? Raising the minimum wage or cutting the deficit further?
I think UKIP MPs can be counted on to vote in favour of tax breaks. I did so consistently as a Conservative and do so consistently as UKIP. If David Cameron's administration had taken our advice and not increased the overseas aid budget to £12 billion a year, we could have had these tax breaks in this Parliament, not in the next one. I strongly favour raising the tax threshold for people on low income.
Do you know that the amount we spend on overseas aid is equivalent to the amount of food waste?
Well,
it's the same value of the money of the food that we chuck away every year.
It would be enough to give us tax breaks in this Parliament.
Would it cover the tax breaks that Douglas Carswell is talking about?
£9 billion a year.
No, but are you seriously telling me?
I'm not seriously telling you anything, but I'm just asking you for the figures.
The world's sixth largest economy, we can't afford to help the world's poorest people by spending the equivalent.
Caroline thinks she's better at spending your money than you are.
That's
why we've increased...
Hang on, Douglas, let Caroline finish her sentence and I'll come to you.
Actually, the value of the money we spend on takeaways every year or the amount of money that we spend on scraping food off the plate and chucking it in the bin, that's the same amount of money that we spend on the world's poorest people in times of disaster.
Is that really a fair swap, Douglas Carswell? The way you are putting it, you're pitting international development against tax breaks. Is that really a fair exchange?
We have massively increased the overseas aid budget, and the consequence of that is that we're not able to
hang on, you say we've massively increased it. From when until when?
We've increased it from about £4 billion to about £12 billion this year. If we had not increased the overseas aid budget, we would have been able to afford these tax breaks in this Parliament. Because there's an election coming, they're promising tax breaks. Why haven't they done it earlier?
Martin Horwood.
The whole point about the 0.7%
local authority is typical of all local authorities in holding down the council tax bill, which everybody has to pay.
It's awful for all those millions of Greeks who are told that the euro would bring them prosperity and underpin Europe's liberal order. It's done the precise opposite.
Because you don't think Greece should ever have been part of the eurozone?
I think Greece should leave the euro, and we should allow Greece to default, devalue and decouple.
But what's it got to do with you in terms of what Greece does?
I think
with all due respect.
The significance is if a new Greek Prime Minister who's come to office negotiating or saying he's going to negotiate a new deal, but not wanting to go so far that he's forced out of the club, if he cannot get any meaningful concessions, what chance is there that David Cameron can credibly say that he's going to get a new deal?
Well, I suppose with all due respect, there's a difference, isn't there, between asking for half of your debts to be written off, if that in fact is what the Greeks are, and asking to renegotiate part of the relationship.
They're not identical. They're not identical, but the truth holds. The Greek Prime Minister is going to ask for a new deal in order to allow Greece to remain in the euro on new terms. David Cameron wants a new deal so that we can remain in the EU on new terms.
Yes, but we're still the relationship with Europe. But let me just come to Martin Horwood. I mean, it's a good thing that they didn't follow the policy, the UK, of the Liberal Democrats and actually sign up to the euro. Now, even clearer than before.
We said for a long time that it wasn't the right time to join the
euro. But when did you let go of that policy? Not that long ago.
No, well, many years ago, before the last election, actually. But the point is, I mean,
change your economic
what Douglas has just outlined is a more extreme position even than Syriza.
Yeah,
I mean, they're not in favour of leaving the European Union for Greece. They're not even in favour of leaving the euro. They're not blaming immigrants. I mean, you know, UKIP makes them look moderate.
Let's have that in-out referendum and see if most of your voters think it's extreme to leave the European Union. I think most people in this country would think it's
But do you support these anti-austerity parties in the principles of what they're trying to do?
I certainly understand why a lot of them are feeling... A lot of Greek voters feel there's no alternative but to vote for them. But I think it's tragic that we are using European money to bail out, in effect, Venezuela economics in Europe. It undermines the liberal order. You know, the extreme leftist
this is a Europe you want to leave anyway.
But the extreme leftist agenda of this party is not the answer to Greece's problems.
Right,
but as you correctly point out, that's for Greeks to work out, not for us to tell them.
But the reality is that even if the UK left the EU, much of our economy, as you know, would still depend on trade with Europe. So we'd still be deeply affected by events like these, except we would have far less say in what happens.
But we would still be able to trade. Switzerland is
But I'm not talking about trade, but about having a say. We would have far less say. That's true. I mean, I take your point, be able to trade, but we'd have far less say, wouldn't we?
A say over what? A say over doubling the amount of Greek debt through bailouts?
Over whatever your position might be.
If we were outside the European Union, we would still be able to trade with them. Norway and Switzerland do more trade with the European Union from outside than we do from within.
How strange then?
Caroline wants to stay in the European Union. Martin wants to stay in the European Union. The established parties want to remain in the EU.
want to stay?
If you don't, vote UKIP.
Do you want... little excerpt. MEPs said Nigel Farage begging him to kick Amjad Bashir out of UKIP. Were you one of those begging him to kick him out?
I only heard that Amjad was leaving the party at the weekend, and I think it's incredibly sad, actually. You know, my new party gained about 30,000 members over the past year. We've lost one. That's sad.
Right, and what do you make of now the accusations being thrown at him? Were you aware, in the way that Nigel Farage said, people have been begging him for months to get rid of him? I mean, you've obviously been part of UKIP for the last few months. You must have known then of these
I'm not an MEP. I didn't know anything about this. What I do know is that it's incredibly difficult when someone changes sides in politics. And I've been there.
You have?
And I know it's incredibly difficult, and I'm not going to throw brickbats. I'm going to leave it there. Do
you think it's a good idea for Nigel Farage to be throwing brickbats and making accusations at someone who's defected?
He knows things that I'm not party to, but at a personal level, I think we need to look at the bigger picture. A referendum is going to come between 2015 and 2020. I hope that Amjad and myself will both be on the same side, campaigning to get out of the EU. That's what matters.
It does seem odd, though, doesn't it, that UKIP only decided to level these accusations, certainly the first that we had heard of it at Amjad Bashir. You certainly hadn't heard of any of these accusations as he was about to announce his defection. Don't you think that's odd?
You need to talk to MEPs who knew about this. As I've said, I didn't know about it. And you know, one of the problems in politics is the incredibly tribal nature of so much of the exchange, and I think politics needs to be repersonalised. And you know, not everyone who wears a different rosette suddenly becomes all good or all bad. And you know, I just think we should remember that this is probably a very difficult decision. I know how difficult it was for me, and I'm not going to.
Well, that sounds like you are gently criticising now the sort of like, was he pushed, did he jump sort of contest that's going on. I mean, Mr. Bashir claims he experienced racism.
The way I see it, which is that this is sad. It makes me personally sad because we've lost a member.
Because you liked him, did you? How well did you know him?
Not well at all, but we've lost a member, and we gained 30,000 members. We've lost a member. It's sad. I know how difficult it will. I know how difficult it is to change sides because I've done it. But you know, I think we should remember that you know, not everyone is good or bad just because of the colour of the rosette they wear.
What do you say to Mr. Bashir, who claims he experienced racism in UKIP? I mean, whatever you think about his defection, and you've said you think it's very sad, that is a serious claim, and you think that should be investigated.
That's the first I've heard of it. I saw an interview with him at the weekend when actually he spoke rather highly of his former party, and he didn't seem to level that kind of accusation at it. So it surprises me, yes. Any suggestion that any of our candidates do not embrace an inclusive civic idea of Britain, I think that would clearly be wrong. But, you know, this is the first I've heard of it.
Right. I mean, it's true, and it turns out that Dan Hannan, an MEP and a good friend of yours, as you say, across the divide now, who did much of the work to woo Mr. Bashir across to the Tories. Have you spoken to Dan Hannan since?
Dan's a good friend of mine. I'm godfather to his children and him to mine. I talk to him all the time. But
so do you think that's fair play?
I wasn't talking to him about politics when I had a chat with him this weekend, believe it or not. But you need to talk to him about any conversations he had. Dan's a very good friend of mine, and regardless of politics, he remains a very good friend.
And you know more than most that defections are important. I mean, you have made massive political capital, rightly or wrongly, out of defecting, and Bashir can do the same and damage UKIP, can't he?
Well, as I said, Joe, I know that to change sides, particularly when people go all tribal on you for doing so, former colleagues and everyone goes so tribal on you.
But I'm talking about the political capital that can be made. You know that it can be. Of course it can.
Well, he's one person out of 30,000.
Right. You know, so defections aren't that important.
Well, yeah. What matters is making sure the voters, not the politicians, make the change between now and May. And they are making that change, and that's what counts.
Right, can I ask you about your thoughts on the comments attributed to Matthew Richardson, UKIP's secretary? I mean, do you feel proud that he said the NHS is the biggest waste of money in the UK?
I find this all a little bit odd. There was apparently a conversation in a pub where he was suggested he may have said this, he may have said that. I think this is a little bit more smear and jeer. What we do know...
You don't think he said that, and you don't think he believes that?
Matthew Richardson is not a UKIP candidate. He does not speak for UKIP.
But he's UKIP secretary, he's quite an important person in the party.
UKIP candidates all sign up to the idea of an NHS that is free at the point of use, funded out of general taxation. And can I go a step further and say, actually, UKIP has announced that it wants to give an extra £3 billion to the NHS, and we will do that by clawing back some of the money from health tourism. I'm very happy to elaborate on that, but UKIP does believe in the NHS and will increase funding on the NHS.
You've won that battle, because there has been a battle, hasn't there, in UKIP over funding of the NHS. I have heard you here on this programme say before that you expected there to be more money spent in a UKIP manifesto. Right. No, I'm not asking you to justify the policy. What I'm saying, was there a battle over it within UKIP? No. Because it certainly wasn't what Nigel Farage initially said, and it is about trust with the electorate.
No. UKIP is committed to spending more. We found a number of ways in which we can spend more money on the NHS, and I think we all agree that that needs to be done. It's a sensible thing to do, and I think to take out of, to jump on something someone may have said at a conference in Washington when they were a student 7 years ago, it's not really being fair to UKIP.
Or what the Secretary is now saying in a pub, which is where, of course, Nigel Farage does spend. And I don't say this in any sort of disparaging way, but it said...
Who said what to who in a pub?
Well, that's the quote. But that's quote. Would you be very unhappy to hear that that was what he said, that actually the NHS is a waste of money and that UKIP is representing figures?
Who said what to who in a pub? It wasn't even apparently said to a journalist. It's all smear and jeer. I don't think you would take credibly a suggestion made that somebody in one of the mainstream parties had...
Oh, I think you'll find we would. I think you'll find we would scrutinise it in exactly the same way.
What was the source of this story? What was the source of this story, Jane?
Well, the journalist did then report...
Was it made to a journalist? What's the source of the story?
Well, the source of the story was actually then through a journalist initially.
Was the comment made to a journalist?
No, I don't think the original comment was made.
Was it recorded?
But it came...
Right.
Who's doing the interview here, you or me?
Well, I think you need to answer these questions if you're so certain on the basis.
But it says to a Conservative audiences where he was said to have described the NHS as the biggest waste of money in the UK and said it was at the heart of the Reichstag bunker of socialism. That doesn't sound like a misquote, does it?
UKIP's policy is to support the NHS. UKIP candidates are campaigning in order to make sure we get an extra $3 billion into the NHS. Smear and jeer is not going to change the fact. UKIP believes passionately
It's not smear and jeer, is it, if they are quotes from two speeches that Mr Richardson gave in the US, admittedly in 2010, but to Conservative audiences? They're not smear and jeer.
He doesn't speak for UKIP. And certainly 7 years ago, in fact, I think 7 years ago, wasn't he a member of the Conservative Party? I don't know. Let's check it out.
Well, lots of people seem to have been members of the Conservative Party. What do you say about the defection? Are you worried about Amjad Bashir?
Very clear about what's needed, whereas you're just expressing some pious hope, as always.
What is the problem with putting a hold on fracking and the extraction of shale gas until people are reassured about the environmental impact?
Fracking is a good thing. Caroline talks about the oil price going down. One of the reasons why the oil price has gone down is because of the shale gas revolution in America. It is doing more to reduce the cost of fuel in petrol stations in this country, please don't interrupt, than anything any government is doing. We need shale gas, and there are some powerful vested interests in the renewable energy sector, in the wind industry.
And there aren't in the shale gas industry.
Who want to keep this moratorium, who want to put this moratorium in place so they can continue
but you haven't answered the question,
hoover up
Douglas.
the subsidies.
You haven't answered the question, though. What is wrong with having a pause while the environmental impact is assessed?
Because it means that British businesses will be priced out of being competitive because energy costs will continue to be disproportionately high in this country, and
except the oil price is falling at the moment, and actually they've been cut.
And householders, well, gas is about 40% more expensive, or was in 2012, 40% more expensive on this side of the Atlantic than the other side of the Atlantic.
And it's
not because the laws of physics are any different, but because we have irrational restrictions upon using this new technology. We need this new technology.
Quentin Fisher
will lower energy prices.
A scientist at the University of Leeds says...
Well,
and everybody would want... Very briefly, do you think it is a good thing? Do you worry less about the fraud issue?
Digital's wonderful because it means we can have direct democracy. We don't have to contract it out to the established parties to do politics for us. And I think this is an idea. There are many ideas that I think UKIP and the insurgent parties need to take up. I think it's wonderful.
Right. I mean...